I never thought I'd be betrayed by my own blood, not after I buried the man I loved more than anything. But grief doesn't reveal who people are. It reveals who they've always been. My name is Vanessa Green. I'm 45, and 2 weeks after my husband died in a car crash, my family came to my doorstep, not to comfort me, not to hold my hand, but to ask me how much money I got from the insurance payout. They didn't bring food. They brought expectations. What you're about to hear isn't a story of mourning. It's a story of reckoning. Because when people treat your heartbreak like a business transaction, you learn to treat their access to your life like a privilege. Stay until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. Because I know I'm not the only one who's been left behind by the ones who were supposed to catch us. The morning Michael died, the sky was the color of cold dishwater. It was one of those slow, sleepy Vermont mornings when the maple trees outside our window glowed orange and gold, and the air smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke. I remember that part vividly, because everything after that was a blur. Michael kissed me twice before leaving for work, once on the cheek, then turning back, once on my forehead like he always did. "Don't forget to grab the apples from Murphy's stand," he said. "We'll bake that pie you love." He smiled like a man who thought there'd always be a tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. At 10:12 a.m., my phone rang. I was in the back room of the library shelving a collection of memoirs we just received. The voice on the other end belonged to a police officer, Mrs. Green. "Your husband's been in an accident." I dropped the phone. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too fast. Michael had taken Route 17, the winding forest road he always used to avoid the traffic. A logging truck lost control on a wet turn. Michael never had a chance. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. They handed me a clipboard, asked me to identify his wallet. They gave me a plastic bag of his things, his glasses, a pen with his name engraved, and a little receipt for 2 Fuji apples from Murphy's stand. He was really going to bake that pie. I don't remember the drive home, but I remember the silence of our house. The clock in the kitchen still ticked. The kettle still sat half full on the stove, but the air was wrong. It felt like something sacred had been ripped out of the walls. I wanted to scream, but instead, I sat in Michael's chair, wrapped in his flannel, and listened to the rain slide down the window. Eli, my nephew, arrived before anyone else. He was only 15, and somehow he'd heard. I didn't even call him, but there he was on our porch, soaked and breathless. He hugged me, and for the first time that day, I cried. Not when they pronounced him dead, not when they handed me his things, but when that boy held me like I was the one who needed saving. That night, I tried to sleep, but the bed was a canyon, cold, wide, echoing. I reached over once, instinctively, for Michael's hand, and all I found was folded bedsheets and memory. By morning, I made 2 cups of coffee by habit. I poured his, and it sat there until it went cold. Grief does that. It turns your routines into reminders. And when I finally found the strength to pick up the phone and call my father, he didn't answer on the first ring, or the second. On the 5th, I heard laughter, clinking glasses. "Rachel. Oh, it's you. Can I call you back? We're in the middle of dinner." I could barely speak. "Dad, Michael's gone. He died yesterday." There was a pause, not of sorrow, of inconvenience. He said, "Oh, that's tragic. But listen, we're celebrating Kendra's engagement. Can we come by next week when things settle down? Settle down. My husband had just been buried in a mangled car on the side of a logging road, and he wanted my grief to wait until the party ended." I hung up, and then I sat on the floor of my kitchen, still wearing Michael's flannel, still hearing the ticking clock. And I knew. The man who would have dropped everything for me was gone. And the people who should have stepped in, they were already stepping away. The day of Michael's funeral was almost too beautiful. Blue sky, crisp air. The kind of autumn day that made you want to believe in second chances. I wore the scarf he'd bought me last Christmas, even though it didn't match my black dress. Lily, my goddaughter, helped me braid my hair, her little fingers trembling the whole time. She didn't ask where Michael was. She knew. The service was at the church on 2nd Street, the one with the crooked bell tower and the oak pews we used to sit in every December. Michael loved the music there, said it made grief seem smaller. I arrived early, greeted guests, stood tall. People came in waves, neighbors, co-workers, even his students. They told me stories I'd never heard before, about how he'd stayed late to tutor, how he used his own money to buy books for kids who couldn't afford them. One woman cried as she said, "Your husband changed my son's life, but not my family." They were late. Kendra texted 10 minutes before the service. Running behind, can't find my navy heels. Tell the pastor to stall LOL. I read it twice, trying to find some trace of irony. There wasn't any. They walked in just as the organ played the opening hymn. Dad in a golf jacket, Kendra in a dress that sparkled. Neither looked sorry, just inconvenienced. Kendra waved to someone in the back. My father asked where the bathroom was, and when I stood at the front, trying to eulogize the man who had made my life feel like poetry. They checked their phones. I got through the speech. I don't know how. I talked about how Michael hated cilantro, how he loved jazz, how he once cried while reading Charlotte's Web aloud to Lily, how he kissed my hand before every road trip, just in case. I didn't look at my family when I said, Michael believed showing up was the most powerful kind of love. He never let anyone he loved feel alone. The irony wasn't lost on me, or the guests. After the service, we returned to my house for a small reception. I didn't want one, but people needed somewhere to cry, and casseroles had already started arriving. Kendra hovered near the wine table. Dad made small talk about the mortgage rate, and then, near the hallway just outside the kitchen, I heard him say it to Uncle Richard. She'll be fine. With Michael's insurance and pension, she's set for life. I stood frozen in the doorway. His son-in-law had just died, and he was calculating my worth like I was a widow on a stock sheet. Kendra joined the conversation, smiling as she poured herself another glass. Maybe she can help me with that loan I mentioned. I mean, she's got the cash now. Cash. That's what my love had become, what my grief had been reduced to. No one offered to help clean. No one checked on Lily. But they all sat there like dinner guests, waiting for the widow to serve them something. Later that night, long after the last car had driven off and the casseroles were cold in the fridge, I sat at Michael's desk. I touched the notepad where he'd written, "Call tree guy, branches over garage," still in his handwriting, still thinking about tomorrow. And I realized I was the only one still mourning a person. The rest of them, they were mourning a resource. It had been 13 days. 13 mornings without Michael's voice. 13 nights of listening to the creak in the hallway and pretending, just for a second, that it might be him. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Eli's math homework in front of me, not because he needed help, but because working through numbers made my brain feel less foggy when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw my father adjusting the collar on his golf shirt. Kendra stood next to him, reapplying lip gloss in the reflection of her phone. I hadn't seen them since the funeral. Not a single check-in. Not one offer to help with the bills, the paperwork, the sheer weight of living in a home that still smelled like him. I opened the door. "Surprise," Kendra chirped. stepping in without waiting for an invitation. "We thought we'd check on you and Lily. Is she at school? Good, we can talk openly." That should have been my first warning. I made coffee out of habit, not out of hospitality, sat them on the couch, watched them settle in like guests expecting hors d'oeuvres. After some awkward chit-chat about my garden and Lily's after-school art club, my father cleared his throat. That throat clear, the same one he used before delivering bad news or invoices. "Vanessa," he began, "we wanted to talk to you about your situation." I blinked. My situation. He looked down at the coffee mug as if it held the script. "Well, now that Michael's gone and you're, transitioning into a new chapter, we thought maybe it was time to have a family conversation." Kendra jumped in. "About the life insurance." I stared at her. She smiled like she was offering me a salad dressing. "What about it?" I asked. "Well," my father continued, "we know Michael had a generous policy. You were always responsible with finances. Your mother and I. We've been struggling since the market downturn. Health costs, inflation. It adds up. You're asking me for money," I said flatly. Kendra laughed nervously. "Not asking. Just proposing. You've always been the stable one, Ness. And with everything you've come into, maybe you could help secure the family's future. Like, say, half of the money my husband left to protect me and Lily. Half of the only safety net I had left." My jaw clenched. My hands shook, but I kept my voice low. "The daughter you didn't call when her husband died. The woman you couldn't bother to comfort at the funeral. You're sitting in my house, drinking my coffee, and asking me to fund your retirement." Kendra looked at my dad. "She's upset," she whispered, as if I weren't in the room. "Vanessa," my father said calmly, "this isn't personal. It's just practical. You've always been a provider." "No," I said. "Michael was the provider. He gave his life working, so I wouldn't have to choose between raising our child and surviving. And now you want me to use that gift to cover your irresponsibility?" He stood up. "You don't need to be dramatic." My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "Get out." Kendra looked stunned. "Wait, you're kicking us out. I buried the man I loved. I tucked in our niece every night with stories so she wouldn't have to cry herself to sleep. And not once did you show up for me. But now that you smell money, here you are. So yes, Kendra, get out." They left in silence, and when the door clicked shut, I stood there, barefoot, in a kitchen still holding the echo of betrayal. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because something stronger than sadness was rising in me. It didn't have a name yet, but it was about to change everything. And when they didn't call after that, not for 3 days, not for a week, not even when I posted Michael's memorial photo online. Silence. Not the heavy kind I had after his death. This was different. This was silence I chose. I stopped answering text messages that started with, "Hey, just wondering." I didn't respond to voicemails from Dad asking if I'd reconsider the proposal. Kendra messaged me 3 times, once saying she'd pay it back. I blocked her. And for the first time since Michael died, I felt something close to clarity. I didn't owe anyone access to my grief. I didn't owe anyone money just because I had it. I owed Lily a mother who was not constantly pouring from a cup left empty by guilt. So I started building a new rhythm. Not grand, not loud, just mine. Mornings began with tea on the porch, wrapped in Michael's scarf. I walked Lily to school even when she didn't need me to. I reopened the small book club I used to host at the library. The first book we chose was about boundaries. How fitting. Grace, my childhood friend who'd returned after years of silence, stopped by with muffins and the same dry humor I remembered from high school. "You always were the one holding the broken pieces," she said. "Ever thought maybe it's time someone held yours? We started having lunch every Friday. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about herbs, weather, music. It was enough." Then one afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside a box of old photographs. Photos of me and Michael from college. Ones I hadn't seen in years. On top, a sticky note in my mother's handwriting. "We didn't handle it right. I'm sorry." There was no phone number, no request, just an envelope of moments. I didn't cry, but I did feel something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but release. Later that night, I sat with my journal and wrote the sentence I hadn't dared admit. I'm not responsible for who they failed to become. Then I circled it. Twice. I opened Michael's laptop, still logged in, still filled with spreadsheets he'd color-coded for our budget. I moved half the insurance money into a new account, one they'd never touch. Then I logged into our mortgage app and clicked paid in full. Our house, ours, free and clear. I lit a candle in the living room, placed it under his photo, and whispered, "It's safe now. I'm safe now." Lily came down in her pajamas, sleepy-eyed. "Is Daddy in the stars?" she asked. I pulled her close. "Yes, baby. And he's watching how brave you are." She nodded. Then she asked something that stopped me. "Are we going to be okay?" I kissed the top of her head and said what I finally believed. Yes, because I finally remembered how to protect us. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted in patches, leaving behind muddy footprints and stubborn ice. But eventually, the crocuses pushed through, just like they always did. Quiet, steady, certain. So did I. One Saturday, I took Lily to the community garden where Michael used to grow tomatoes too close together. She planted 2 rows of carrots and said, "These are for Daddy." I nodded, biting back tears, because they were, and because she knew. That night, Grace and I sat on my porch drinking cider. She looked out over the trees and said, "You've changed." I smiled. "No, I just stopped pretending I hadn't already." We didn't talk about Kendra or Dad. I hadn't heard from them since the box of photos. I didn't expect to. They knew. They'd overplayed their hand, and now the door was closed. But silence, this time, wasn't cold. It was firm, kind, freeing. A few weeks later, I saw a post in the town forum. Kendra's influencer brand had collapsed, some sponsorship dispute. Her comment section was full of silence. Dad had been seen at the pharmacy, arguing with the clerk over co-pays. I didn't gloat, but I didn't go, because some things aren't punishments. They're consequences. I spent my days helping Lily build a birdhouse for school, reading to kids at the library, planning a small memorial bench in the park for Michael. I engraved it with his words, "Show up, always." He had. They hadn't. And now I had, for myself. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, I cooked the pie he never got to make. Fuji apples, cinnamon, crumble top. I placed a slice under the stars. Lit a candle. Lily leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "Do you think Daddy would be proud of us?" I looked up at the dark sky, then down at her, then at myself. Yes, because we didn't break. We bloomed. Some losses are loud. Some leave ashes. But some leave you stronger than you ever thought you'd need to be.